Hello everyone, I'm Kathy and welcome back to our Human Anatomy and Physiology class. Today, let us discuss about the respiratory system. At the end of today's session, you will be able to describe the components of the respiratory system in relation to its function. Describe the events involved in gas exchanges. Outline the control of respiration. Our slide contains the following: structure and functions of respiratory system, ventilation, gas exchange, and respiration control. Let us have a quick recap of the respiratory system. It is for the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the blood. It regulates blood pH and consists of the lungs and respiratory passages. Anatomy of the respiratory system is composed of two parts. We have the upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. Your upper respiratory tract is composed of your nose or your external nose and nasal cavity, and your pharynx or your throat. While the respiratory tract is composed of your larynx or your voice box, trachea, windpipe, bronchi, if it's singular, we call it bronchus, and your lungs. Let us discuss the parts one by one. Okay, nose, you have your external nose and your nostrils, also called nares. Okay, nostril hair filters incoming air. And nasal cavity, lined with pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, warms, moistens, and cleanses incoming air. Houses olfactory receptors for detecting odor. Bony ridges or concha, increased surface area, separated from buccal cavity by hard palate. Next, you have your respiratory tract. Let us start with pharynx. It's a common passageway connecting to the mouth and nose. It extends from the end of your nasal cavity going down to the larynx, and it is lined with mucous membrane. Larynx, a cartilaginous structure. It connects pharynx with trachea. Laryngeal opening is hooded with the epiglottis, prevents entry of food or drink into the trachea when swallowing, and it contains vocal cords to produce sound used in speech. Trachea extends from larynx to bronchi. It is a tough, flexible tube reinforced with C-shaped cartilage rings. It protects the trachea and keeps trachea open. It is lined with pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Bronchi. Trachea divides into left and right main bronchi. Each bronchus connects to a lung. It is lined with pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, also supported by C-shaped cartilage rings. Mucociliary transport system. It is formed by ciliated mucosa in respiratory tract, traps debris and microorganisms in mucus. Sweeping action of cilia transport the debris and microorganisms out of the respiratory tract to be coughed out or swallowed. Lungs. It is shaped like a cone. It has sharp superior end called apex. Its base sits on the diaphragm, covered by serous membrane or flora. Each lung divides into lobes, 3 in the right lungs and 2 in the left lung. The tracheobronchial tree. Each main bronchus branches into lobar bronchi to serve each lobe. Lobar bronchi branch further, eventually giving rise to bronchioles. Bronchioles branch further, eventually giving rise to alveolar ducts that connect two bunches of alveoli or air sacs. The amount of cartilage reinforcement decreases, and the amount of smooth muscles increases until the alveolar ducts. Respiratory membrane. This is where gas exchange between blood and air occurs. It is formed by walls of the alveoli and surrounding capillaries. Alveolar wall is thin and it is due to the simple squamous epithelium. It has a large surface area. Special cells in the alveoli secrete surfactant, which reduces the tendency for alveoli to recoil. Macrophages are present to phagocyte debris and microorganisms. Ventilation. Inhalation is an active process, and your diaphragm contracts and flattens. increases height, superior, inferior of thoracic cavity, external intercostal muscles. It contracts and raises the sternum forward and ribs upwards. It also increases transverse dimensions of the thoracic cavity. Both cause increase in the thoracic volume. Lungs are attached to the inner walls of the thoracic cavity. When thoracic cavity expands, it pulls on the lungs and the lungs expands. So what happens is that the air pressure in the lungs drops to below atmospheric pressure and air moves into your lungs. Exhalation. Normal exhalation is a passive process. It doesn't require muscular contraction. Your diaphragm expands and arches upwards. It decreases the height superior-inferior of the thoracic cavity. So it's basically the reverse of the inhalation. External intercostal muscle relaxes, drops the sternum downward and the ribs forward. It decreases the transverse dimension of the thoracic cavity. Then your lung recoils due to the elastic connective tissues in lungs. Both cause decrease in the thoracic volume. And then your lung will contract to its original position. The air pressure in the lungs increases to higher than atmospheric pressure, and air moves out of the lungs. So this is a diagram of the ventilation. Number 1, at the end of expiration, alveolar pressure is equal to the atmospheric pressure. Therefore, there is no air movement in your lungs. Then during inspiration, it increases the thoracic volume, which results in the decreased pressure inside your alveoli. Therefore, air moves into your lungs. Okay, you see the arrow going in. And then, at number 3, at the end of inspiration, alveolar pressure is equal to the atmospheric pressure. Therefore, there is no air movement. During expiration, a decreased thoracic volume results in increased pressure inside your alveoli. Therefore, air moves out of the lungs. So, your lungs is like a balloon that would either expand or contract due to the differences in the atmospheric pressure. Gas exchange. Diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between compartments is from high to low pressure. I have summarized it here on the right side where blood is in between air in alveoli and tissue cells. External respiration happens between the pulmonary blood capillary and air, while internal respiration happens between the systemic blood capillary and your tissue cells. Oxygen will move from air in alveoli to the blood to the tissue cells. Then the opposite will happen wherein your carbon dioxide will move from tissue cells to the blood and to the air in your alveoli. Internal and external respiration. External respiration, it happens in the pulmonary capillaries. Capital letter P means partial. Okay, so partial oxygen in the alveolar space is higher than the partial oxygen in your blood. Oxygen diffuses across respiratory membrane into the blood. And then your partial carbon dioxide in the blood is higher than the partial carbon dioxide in the alveolar space. And so, carbon dioxide diffuses across respiratory membrane out of the blood. Internal respiration, it happens in the capillaries in the tissues. Gases diffuse between the blood, then interstitial fluid, and into the cells. Then your partial oxygen in the blood is actually higher than the partial oxygen in the interstitial fluid, and that is also higher than the partial oxygen inside your cells. Oxygen diffuses from the blood into the interstitial fluid going to your cells. Partial carbon dioxide in the cell is higher than the partial carbon dioxide in the interstitial fluid, and that is also higher than the partial carbon dioxide in the blood. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the cells into interstitial fluid into your blood. Gas transport in the blood. So you have the oxygen transport and carbon dioxide transport. For oxygen transport, 98.5% is bound reversibly to hemoglobin. Low partial oxygen, wherein oxygen is released, example would be in your tissue. And then high partial oxygen, wherein oxygen binds to hemoglobin. Example will be in your lungs. 1.5% dissolved in the plasma. For carbon dioxide transport, 7% of this is dissolved in the plasma, 23% is bound to hemoglobin, and 70% as bicarbonate ions. Respiration control. Respiratory muscles are under both involuntary and voluntary controls. It depends on the type of activity wherein your involuntary control may dominate over voluntary control and vice versa. Respiratory centers. Your cerebral cortex regulates voluntary breathing. Respiratory centers in the brainstem regulate involuntary breathing. Primarily medulla respiratory center in the medulla of the brainstem. Chemoreceptor sense changes in 1. You have your arterial blood with your partial carbon dioxide, which is indirect. Then you have your partial oxygen and hydrogen. Then your brain interstitial fluid and cerebrospinal fluid. From now onwards, we will refer to cerebrospinal fluid as CSF. And we have hydrogen ions. And you also have different chemoreceptors are sensitive to different conditions. There are two groups of chemoreceptors. One will be the central chemoreceptors, and the next one will be peripheral chemoreceptors, like your aortic bodies and carotid body. Central chemoreceptors. It is located in the medulla, near respiratory centers. It is sensitive to carbon dioxide-induced hydrogen ion concentration in CSF and brain interstitial fluid. Central chemoreceptors are bathed in brain interstitial fluid. Hydrogen ions cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. Carbon dioxide is lipid-soluble and is able to diffuse through arterial walls that form the blood-brain barrier into the CSF and brain interstitial fluid. Central chemoreceptors play a major role in making adjustments in ventilation in response to changes in arterial partial carbon dioxide. Central chemoreceptor, if there is an increase in the partial carbon dioxide in your arterial blood, there will also be an increase in the partial carbon dioxide in the CSF, and there is an increase in the hydrogen ion in the CSF, which will stimulate central chemoreceptors. And in the same time, it will also stimulate respiratory center and increase breathing. And after that, your partial carbon dioxide returns to normal. So if there's a decrease in the partial carbon dioxide in the arterial blood, there will also be a decrease in the partial carbon dioxide in the CSF. And of course, it will also decrease the hydrogen ions in CSF, which will then stimulate your central chemoreceptors. It will inhibit respiratory center and reduce breathing. And then after that, your partial carbon dioxide will return to normal. When everything increases, it will stimulate respiratory center. When everything decreases, it inhibits respiratory center. Peripheral chemoreceptors. It is located in your aortic bodies, around the aortic arc, and carotid bodies, which is actually located in the fork of carotid arteries. It is sensitive to hydrogen concentration and very low partial oxygen levels in arterial blood. It is only weakly stimulated by changes in the carbon dioxide-induced hydrogen ion concentration in the arterial blood. Peripheral chemoreceptors are bathed in the arterial blood. Okay. Now let's move to our easy peasy lemon squeezy questions again. Number 1. The glottis is the opening of the blank. Number 2. The air pressure within our thoracic cavity will be blank when the thoracic cavity enlarges. I hope that you got the answers right. Number 1. The glottis is the opening of the trachea. And number 2. The air pressure within our thoracic cavity will be decreased when the thoracic cavity enlarges. Thank you so much, and I hope that you learned something from me today. I'll see you in class. Bye-bye!